All right, so we got a lot to get to this week. I'm a little late, a little behind the eight ball, so jumping into it, maybe not as fully prepared as I would like to be, but still wanted to get this out, especially as we get closer to the weekend and some of the big games coming up. So, going to recap last week's picks, talk about maybe the biggest rivalry in high school hockey, take a look back at that game from Wednesday. Was also on site for the Thanksgiving Invitational over the weekend. I got to see four pretty high end teams in action there. So a couple thoughts I wanted to get to on that. Plus, we'll update the top 10 rankings. Those have been updated, not just high school, but AAA rankings as well. So we'll get to that in a second. And of course, we'll have our picks for the games of the week coming up, which again is kind of why I'm a little urgent or pressed to get this podcast out on this Wednesday afternoon. So if any of that piques your interest, obviously, do me a favor and subscribe here on YouTube, or if you're listening and follow, rate, and review on Apple and Spotify. Any of that is greatly appreciated. I was delving into the analytics a little bit and saw as many as 80% of you watching right now are not currently subscribed, and I just can't have that, guys. So if you like the content we're putting out here at PD's Picks, support your boy and subscribe. Really appreciate it. But let's talk some hockey now. We'll get into it. We'll talk some hockey. Over the weekend, I mentioned the Thanksgiving Invitational, Brighton, Hartland, Clarkston, Forest Hills Central, four very top-end teams. All four were in my preseason top 25 to start the year. Three of them are currently in my top 10. We'll get, like I said, get to that a little bit later. So a lot of great action over the weekend between those four teams, and a nice structure, nice setup. I think it was Rick Gadwa talking about trying to emulate the Great Lakes Invitational a little bit with this particular event, and the games didn't disappoint. You had two 1-goal games that came down to a shootout, and then the other two games were 1 and 2-goal games going into the third period. So a lot of really good high-end action there. I'll touch on a little bit. I did put out a blog on pdspicks.com if you guys want to check it out, which probably goes into a little bit more depth than what I will here today on the podcast. But kind of broke down what I liked about each of the four teams, what kind of stood out to me during game action, certain players, the style in which they played. We'll get into it here in a little bit. But, my biggest thing to me out of these four teams was just how Brighton looked in midseason form, like just buzzing. Chemistry was great. Guys knew where others were going to be at. There wasn't really, Heartland, for instance, I said they were zigging when they wanted to zag, and pucks hopping over sticks, and it just wasn't quite clean. Brighton, on the other hand, was very clean, very buttoned up, good puck movement, good chemistry, like I mentioned. And obviously, you'd maybe almost expect that given the senior class and how long these guys have been playing together at this level. But even I was blown away at how smooth and how crisp they looked at times. Cam Duffney, to me, was pretty obviously the best player on the ice over the weekend. Just his ability. The production might not have been there. I didn't dive into the numbers too much, but Lane Petit earned tournament MVP honors. So obviously he got the nod for being the best player of the tournament. But I'm just saying, from what I saw, Duffney impacted the game in a lot of different ways that might not have necessarily got on the score sheet. I think he did end up having a goal and an assist in the game that I watched, but still impacting the game in ways that maybe I didn't even necessarily expect him to be as involved in, whether it was on the forecheck or getting involved in the defensive zone and doing some of the little things that I've wanted to see out of Duffney there. So I thought he looked sharp. I mentioned Petit obviously had a great weekend and earned honors there for the tournament. Tim Peterson, a freshman, again on pdspicks.com. I called out a couple freshmen early on this season that have stood out to me. Tim Peterson obviously being a big one there. Skating on the top line for Brighton alongside Duffney there. That's a pretty big responsibility you're handing over to a 14, 15-year-old kid playing some of his first varsity action. and scores his first goal over the weekend. That was an exciting moment, I think, for all involved. Charlie Birchfield, he's a guy I've talked about a bunch, and obviously very well known. He was a Team Michigan guy last spring. I think he's a pretty important piece to this team. You know, he's not on that top line with Duffney, but he's adding an element to that middle six in the lineup there, where there's some grit, there's a change of pace, right? Duffney and Petit can get up and down the ice and make plays. Birchfield is heavy. He's going to make it hard for you there along the boards and below the goal line. He's just a nice change of pace there, I think, in the middle of their lineup, and brings a style of play that adds a ton of value, I think, to that lineup. In the defensive unit as a whole, this was kind of my other big takeaway with Brighton was they don't really have that stud anchor on the back end like they've had in a couple of years past. And some of the guys that come to mind, like Maddox McMullen last year, Tim Urkla a couple of years ago, Sam Brennan, if you want to go that far back. Brighton has always kind of had that one top end guy they've leaned on for a lot of minutes. And this unit is a lot more even, I think, across the board and really consistent, all capable of moving the puck, all capable of keeping things simple, which I love to see out of the back end there. So that unit as a whole, I was pretty happy with. Let's see here. Where do I want to go next? I'll go with Clarkston next. Clarkston, I ranked these 4 teams on Twitter. I don't know if anybody saw that. Got a question just about feedback and what I thought. And I ranked these teams: Brighton, Hartland, Clarkston, Forest Hill Central, 1, 2, 3, 4. Clarkston and Hartland, I wish I'd have gotten to see them go head to head, because it would have been a pretty unique matchup, I think, and maybe gotten some resolution to who the better team was between those two. So purely speculation, I did put Hartland ahead of Clarkston, and I'll get into some of those reasons here. I thought Hartland's depth was a little more talented, skilled, a little more high end maybe than what Clarkston has, which is kind of why I gave Hartland the nod. Hartland, as I mentioned, was kind of sloppy at times. It wasn't buttoned up. It wasn't real crisp, clean. Even on the power play, for instance, where you have some extra time and space, guys still kind of fumbling over pucks, zigging when they want to zag, and just kind of off rhythm a little bit. I think a lot of that comes with it being early in the season, a pretty young team. I think a lot of those wrinkles will get ironed out over time. So I'm not necessarily worried about that from Hartland's standpoint. What I liked was that even in the midst of all those kind of little errors, bounces not really going your way, Hartland's talent and depth, as I mentioned, was able to really make up for some of those deficiencies or some of those errors. They get a big win there over Forest Hill Central. Started out, they were down 1-0 at the end of 1, I believe, and then end up scoring 5 unanswered and pull away there from the Rangers. So that was a pretty cemented win, a pretty clear-cut win there. Then you come back, you take on Brighton, your big rival, in a big spot Saturday night. That place was packed, a lot on the line, intense rivalry. And Hartland down 2-0, trailed again later in the game, tied it up, forced that overtime shootout. So as like I said, as much as they struggled or might have been off at times, to still be in that game with Brighton, who's high end, who looked as smooth and looked as clean as they did, I think says a lot about Hartland's just overall talent and skill level. Ian Castamo, to me, was a stud, looked like the real deal. LJ Sabala, I thought, had a real nice weekend too. I think he had a goal. He produced and did well for the Eagles there. I also like their goaltenders a lot. Brady Hubenschmidt was in net the night I watched him. He's a big kid, athletic, moves really well, just battles and competes. And I know they've got options there on the back end too. They've got a couple goalies, I think, capable of playing at the varsity level. So options there for Hartland. And like I said, just a real, God, I got to sneeze. Real clean, as ugly as it was at times, they were still able to kind of overcome that battle through, compete in both of those games and almost beat Brighton there in a coin flip shootout. So I'll shift here, circle back to Clarkston. Actually, Clarkston initially was a team I had pretty high in that top 10, and they're still in the top 10. Don't get me wrong. But like I said, I do have Heartland ahead of them for a couple of the reasons I just mentioned. Clarkston's top line, on the other hand, could be the best line in the state, and good enough to skate with anybody, um, anybody they'll see all season. Wade and Croston, obviously, we've talked about them ad nauseum, and plenty of people around the state are already well aware of what those guys are capable of. But when I saw the lineup, saw the guys coming out the door and everything, Wade and Croston were both on opposite wings, and I was like, well, who the hell is playing the middle? And I got my first look, a real good look at Kyle Lynch, first year junior forward there for the Wolves, who is the real freaking deal. He's another guy I wrote about on the blog on pdspicks.com. He's every bit as good, can skate with, handle, make plays with and without Wade and Croston, right? He's a good give and go guy. He's able to find Croston or Wade in those scoring areas, but he's also able to get to those scoring areas and create his own opportunities, even aside from playing with those guys. So Lynch is a guy who could very sneaky be one of those top players in that junior class in the state of Michigan. I might be a little bold there, being that he's only played 3 or 4 games here in high school hockey, but I really liked what I saw out of him. Showed a ton of talent, puck skills, good footwork, which you always love to see, and jumps out at you when you're watching kids at this level. So he looked really strong. Liked what I saw out of him a lot. I think that pushes that line over the top. They already have 2 kids that are arguably 2 of the top 10, top 20 in the state. Now you add Lynch to that mix, and I think that top line gets very, very scary. Another line I actually liked for them, not nearly as sexy, not nearly as skilled or fancy plays or the toe drags or the tic tac toes, but I really liked their Eric Wade, Frank Stanek, Gavin Anderson. That trio to me was a really hard-working line. They're the kind of your hard hat line, right? Right, like I said, not the sexy, but the necessary, where they're going to go out, forecheck the piss out of your defenseman, make you work for it, make you earn it, finish their checks. That was a sneaky good line for them, I thought, and ended up producing. I want to say, I think Wade and Anderson both had goals over the weekend. I could be mistaken on that, but nonetheless, I thought that gave them a great line there in the middle of their lineup, capable of kind of grinding and wearing down the opponent. So Hartland, already mentioned them. Forest Hill Central, biggest takeaway, they're just young. They're just young. And I think weekends like this do a lot for that development process. That a 5-1 loss, a 3-0 loss, if you're just looking at the box score, probably pretty underwhelming. But for the guys in that locker room, for them to compete and battle, block shots, play at that pace, create a scoring opportunity, even if you don't finish, like those are little victories that I think add up over time. And if you're building a program and you've got, a junior like Grendel, a sophomore like Milak, a freshman like Mike Timmer, he was another one I mentioned there on the blog. They've got some young guys, Kipke on the back, Eli Ripke on the back end. He's a junior. Pierzynski, he's a junior. Like there's a lot of underclassmen on this roster that are playing an impactful role for that team. So for them to get this experience against the cream of the crop in high school hockey is a great learning experience. They took their licks. There were plenty of learning moments. I thought Gibson Grendel, for instance, late in the game, it's a 1-goal, 2-goal game. I think he might have been feeling the pressure a little bit. I got to make a play. I got to do something. You kind of start gripping the stick a little too tight, maybe forcing some plays you wouldn't normally do. And so that seemed a little evident to me. Again, a learning experience. Milak took a penalty late. One bad penalty turned into 2 bad penalties. Some of that stuff, the mental stuff, will kind of snowball on you. I think that's another learning experience. I think Coach Bill McSween will do a nice job working with those guys. And again, I've been there. I know what that learning experience is like. There's frustrating moments. There's growing and teaching moments. Nemers in net. He took a penalty in goal because there was a scrum in front of him, and some of those things we probably don't need to, but again, it's that learning experience and learning how to kind of let things go in the moment. And so again, it's an opportunity for I think that Rangers program to learn from those mistakes, move forward, be a better team coming out of that, and ultimately could pay off a ton of dividends down the road, whether it's in conference play, regionals, states, and beyond. Right, like that's a really good learning experience for that young group to go up against, whether it pays off next week or whether it pays off next year, even. So, kind of a long play there, I think, for the Rangers, but ultimately very beneficial. So, I'll shift gears here. We'll get into recapping last week's picks. Uh, it's been fun. So, uh, I'm trying to find and identify some of the tougher games on the schedule to pick, right? I don't want to. I'm not going to go into a cupcake one and pick a team that's going to ultimately get mercied, right? I want some close ones. I want some difficult calls to make, and ultimately that's panning out. I went 4-4 last week in the picks. You, the people, went 4-4 as well. So we're picking good games. We're getting good matchups, and the results are showing. So I did want to, one of those games was CC versus Rice, and I did want to share some thoughts kind of on that particular rivalry. Watching that broadcast on YouTube, the broadcast by Prep, I believe was the company. Um, that place was packed to the gills, 3 and 4 rows deep along the glass. Pretty wild environment. Had to have been a blast to play in front of, regardless of what team you were on there. Just a high stress, high pressure situation that I'm sure for the kids was a fun one. But I mentioned that broadcast, grade A. Watching it back on YouTube was like watching something off of Bally Sports or something. It was really cool to see, and it's the biggest rivalry in high school hockey, but it's been incredibly one-sided as of late. I mean, everything with CC has been pretty one-sided, but CC has won 8 of the last 10 matchups there, and watching that game from Wednesday night, CC kind of bullied Rice a little bit last week. The first couple goals were just outworking people in front of the net, out muscling guys, and albeit Kale Rogowski was responsible for some of that, and he's a towering figure there, right? Listed at 6'4" and 200 plus pounds. He'd be hard for anybody to handle. So that's maybe a bit of an outlier, but I think there was even moments where, Andrew Atala just battled with Rice defensemen down below the goal line and just outworked them at times, and was able to shake defenders and lose them and really win battles down low. Stefan Fonda tracked down a Warrior on a puck retrieval, caught up to him and just kind of edged him out and came away with the puck pretty clean and generated a scoring opportunity. I don't want to draw too many conclusions, about Rice from just this particular game, because CC kind of has a way of humbling many of its opponents, right? I don't think, I don't want to draw too many conclusions, but I just kind of expected Rice to maybe show a little bit better than what I saw on Wednesday. So it's early, there's so much hockey left to play too. I think Rice will come back in that rematch with something to prove, obviously. So there's no doubt in my mind Rice is better than what they showed on Wednesday and will be better as the season wears on as well. So, like I said, I was just hoping for a little bit more, but ultimately I know there's more there too. That might not have been, a couple plays I think guys are going to want back when they look back at that game in hindsight, or maybe that's even a game you just kind of throw it in the trash and forget and move forward. So, as far as CC goes, I've talked about Jackson Walsh, all offseason leading up to November. A guy I had in my top 5. He's a special one on a team that is full of talented players across the board. He is very noticeably, the best of the bunch, stands out from the rest. Stefan Fonda, I mentioned him. He had a big night. I liked his game a lot. I mentioned his effort on the forecheck earlier. he almost made it look easy at times with his ability there on the forecheck and getting into guys and coming away with pucks. CC is interesting this year in particular. I mean, they go 4 lines deep. They go 3 D pairs on the back end. I might get myself into a little trouble here, but um, I'm getting less and less impressed by the individual players and more impressed by the collective as a team. And what I mean by that is like, yes, Walsh is a special player. Yes, there are 2 to 3 other high end standouts on that team. But a lot of these guys, if you isolated them, if you plucked them out and put them on another team, they're good. They're they're a top 6 kid on just about any program in the state. But I wouldn't necessarily say they dominate as an individual. Um, I don't know that, and what I mean, but like, I don't know that CC is miles and miles ahead in terms of sheer talent. They just have a crazy amount of depth, and that depth buys in. That depth is very structured and committed to the cause from a coaching perspective. And I think that's a credit to Coach Cal and that coaching staff. Um, where other programs have like 6, 7, 8, maybe 9 functional forwards that they feel comfortable with up front, CC's got 12 or 13. Where other programs have 3 or 4 defensemen that they're really comfortable with on the back end, CC's got 6 or 7. So I don't think CC has 6 or 7 guys that are better than any team's number 1 guy. But I do think they have 10 to 12 guys that are as good or better than any team's number 6 guy off the roster, as an example. I don't know if that completely makes sense, but like what I'm trying to say is like most top end teams in the state have a good top line. The higher up the rankings you go, they have a solid second line. And if you're fortunate enough, I think like a team like Brighton, you've got a really reliable third line, for instance. CC has 4 of those lines where most programs only have, 1. Some programs have 2, and like I said, for a handful that may have 3. So, I'll kind of wrap it up with that. I'll leave it at that as far as CC and Rice goes. There was a lot going on last week, even aside from just that one rivalry. A couple other rivalries I wanted to mention as well. Ann Arbor Pioneer with a big upset last week. I took Saline in that game. 84% of you took Saline as well, but it was the Pioneers coming away with a 2-1 win on Rivalry Wednesday. Hats off to them. Definitely thought they'd compete well with the Hornets, but that's a big W for them. So Orchard Lake St. Mary's pulled off, I'd say, a big upset over Brighton too. I didn't necessarily expect that. I took Brighton. 75% of you took Brighton. I believe Orchard Lake was up 3-0 at one point in that game before Brighton, kind of clawed their way back into it a little bit and made it a close one there at 3-2. I got to mention this too. A bit of a shout out here for Kalamazoo United. They played the Kalamazoo Eagles on Thanksgiving Eve last week. I almost included that game in the matchups for the games of the week. I just, 2 Kalamazoo programs, 2 Kalamazoo co-ops, so it's involving a lot of the schools in that community. They were going head to head. Ultimately decided to go against it because I thought, no way, like I don't even expect this game to be close. I'm not going to bother. Jesse Ruelas scored the game-winning goal in overtime to give KU the 2-1 win over the Eagles. Get this. It's KU's first league win in over 2 years, people. So big upset there, and comes at the expense of a pretty big rival, I'd assume there, in a pretty intense game. That, again, I had kind of completely written off, and they pull off the big win there. The Eagles have been a strong program in the SCHL now for a number of years. Went to a Division I state quarterfinals as recently as 2020. So for KU to pull off that upset, I've been a part of some of those wins as a player and as a coach. And those can really be momentum swinging, program building types of wins where, you're going up against a team who's just beating you down over the last couple of years, and then finally you pick up the right player or players and you get the right combination and you get the right attitude in the locker room and you go out and you pull off a big upset, it can really snowball into a ton of momentum there. So would love to see this kind of be a launching point for them moving forward there on the west side. So okay, let's update the top 10 rankings here. Let's get into this a little bit. And as I take a brief break there. So same faces, just some new places. And maybe that's a little bit of a letdown to some of you who like seeing volatility in the rankings, but I think there's no reason to really upset the apple cart too much yet, I don't think, based on what we've seen. Small sample size, right? Like few teams have 4 games in the bag, let alone 5, 6, 8, right? Like we just don't have enough data, I think, enough information, enough head-to-head matchups to draw too many conclusions to really start, bringing in new faces, dropping people out of the top 10. So no fancy graphics today either. A little rushed into the episode here. So really was more worried about timing and getting it out to you people than having a nice cleaned up presentation for everybody. So if you've grown accustomed to watching this on YouTube and seeing the graphics and all that stuff, fret not. I will bring it back in the future. Don't worry. If you're listening on Apple and Spotify, then I guess you're not really missing out on too much. So we will get into the rankings. I'll run through them here. Hopefully it's not too hard to follow without a visual. But at number 10, I dropped Grand Rapids Catholic Central down 1 spot here. They were at 9 last week. I got them at 10. They're 4-0-0 to start the season. So it's not really about what they've done. It's more about what other people have done and shown against maybe a little bit tougher competition thus far. So I got Grand Rapids Catholic Central here at 10. Number 9, I got Brother Rice. They're down 4 spots. That's a pretty big drop off, I know, but maybe that's a little recency bias with what I saw last Wednesday. Just didn't love the way they looked against CC, and I realize that was going against the best team in the state, but I feel like Rice got pushed around a little bit. Would love to see them respond with a couple big performances here down the stretch. The Catholic League playoffs are coming up here. Maybe they respond in a big way and get right pretty quick, but would like to see more on them too. So again, small sample size, but just that game last week didn't sit super well with me, and I'm sure it didn't sit well with the Warriors either. But anyways, Brother Rice, number 9 here at 2-1-0 on the season. Orchard Lake St. Mary's, I've got up 2 spots. Probably could have jumped up even further if you really wanted to put a ton of stake in that Brighton win last Wednesday. They're 3-0-0 to start the season. They're a team, I really liked coming into the season already, but then with the impressive win over Brighton, could really be a sign of even bigger things to come. Not to mention my guy, Will Keene, has a 93.8 save percentage and given up just 4 goals in those 3 games. Their leading scorer right now is a freshman, Thaddeus Rainish. I was talking about freshmen all week, and there's another one making a big impact that maybe didn't really expect yet for the Eaglets. So that'll be a fun one to watch as the season unfolds. Number 7, I got U of D dropping down 1 spot. Nothing major. They were idle last week, didn't play. They got a big matchup coming up, which I'm going to get into in a little bit. They take on Orchard Lake St. Mary's, so we'll get a bit of a 7-8 matchup there. I believe that's later tonight, actually. Had I delayed this podcast, we might have been able to let the dust settle a little bit as far as the rankings go. But nonetheless, that'll be a big matchup later tonight. Number 6, I got Clarkston down 2 spots. 3-1-0 on the season. I mentioned that top line. They're filthy. Everyone's talking about Ronnie Wade and Owen Croston. And like I mentioned, Kyle Lynch is the real deal too. Don't get caught sleeping on that guy. Really high end, probably one of the top juniors I've seen so far. And so that top line is as good as anyone in the state. I just maybe a little bit leery about depth. I don't know. I just want to see more of Clarkston. And maybe wrongfully dropping them down 2 spots, but ultimately, like I said, comparing Clarkston's body of work over the weekend and Hartland's body of work, I ended up leaning towards Hartland, who I have here at number 5, up 2 spots from number 7 last week. 1-2-1 on the season so far. 2 tough losses to arguably 2 of the top teams in the state, who I'm going to get to in a minute. Like I said, would have loved to see them go head to head with Clarkston last weekend and prove which one was the better one on the ice, but I'm left to kind of speculate for now. So, okay, I'll get into number 4. I got Byron Center up 4 spots, 4-0-0 to start the season. Really impressed by what they did in that Stevenson game. It just has stuck with me ever since. And they got a big win over the weekend, 3-2 over East Grand Rapids. I know that EGR squad is tough. I know that's a tough matchup there. So for them to scratch and claw and come away with a win, I think says a lot about that Byron Center squad. Moving, like, the rest of this list, 5 through 10, feels pretty fluid, but 4, 3, 2, and 1 seem very solid to me at the moment. It's going to take a lot, I think, for me to change the top crust here of my top 10. And Cade Pratt currently leads the Dogs with 9 points there for Byron Center. So he's one I've talked about a bunch. Froisland is another one. I like what they're doing there at Byron Center and have them here at number 4. So number 3, one of those teams, Hartland, dropped one too. I got Houghton, who is 3-0-0 on the season. Connor Raffelli is playing some big boy hockey up there. 3 goals and 7 points. He's making an early case to be that top defenseman in the state and really, really impressing. You know, they may not even really slow down until they see Brother Rice and U of D come to town in mid-January. And even then, the way things sit right now with all 3 of those teams, Houghton, Rice, and U of D, I probably got the Gremlins favored in both of those matchups still. So Houghton pretty comfortably, pretty solid here at number 3 in my top 10. Number 2, unchanged again. I got Brighton 3-1-0 on the season. That one loss to Orchard Lake St. Mary's. Again, not totally upsetting the apple cart here. Would like to just see more data points, more games, more action between not just Brighton but Orchard Lake as well before I really started drawing any major conclusions. They looked really sharp over the weekend too. I talked about them a bunch. Cam Duffney dominated. Lane Petit, tournament MVP honors. They can get it done offensively in a lot of different ways, and I think that'll make them very, very difficult to stop this season. And then number 1, obviously, you got Detroit Catholic Central. That's unchanged. Another shutout of another Michigan high school hockey team. February 16th is the last time an in-state program scored a goal on CC. They played their biggest rival last Wednesday and dominated them, downright bullied them at times. Kale Rogowski was the reason for a lot of that jockeying in front of the net too. So I'm hoping next week against Brighton is interesting, but really wouldn't be surprised if CC rolls into the new year either. So we will wrap up the top 10 there. Let's look at the week ahead here real quick. The 4 Ann Arbor schools compete annually in the Dan Gillick Cup, basically a city championship decided between Pioneer, Skyline, Huron, and Gabriel Richard. Believe Gabriel Richard is the reigning champ as they've been, I think, the last few seasons. Now I heard this year they're actually competing off the ice as well. The 4 schools are taking part in a fundraiser supporting the MJR Foundation. By seeing what program, I love this. I love this given the hockey here. They're competing to see which program has the best flow. And you know, hockey players, myself included, love the lettuce. We love our hockey hair. And the boys, as a seasoned veteran of the flow, it's been better, but this is pretty good for the start of the year. I will say this: grow it while you got it. I don't think mine's going anywhere anytime soon. I think I'm pretty good with the flow at this point, but I'm just trying to educate the younger generations. You're either going to lose it or it's going to go gray on you. So enjoy the hockey hair while you can. I asked if I could participate, even given the lettuce. I asked if I could participate in this, but they said I had too many grays in here. And I don't know how I feel about that. It's not that bad, but Regardless, be sure to check out the MJR Foundation. Was set up in honor of Ann Arbor Skyline alum Miles Jeffrey Roberts. They've set out to empower young athletes excuse me. They've set out to empower young athletes and promote mental well-being and suicide prevention in honor of Miles, who passed away there in 2017. So I've included a link in the description to their website where you can learn more about the cause and obviously make donations. The fundraiser began on November 14th and it runs through next week, through the conclusion of the Dan Gillick Cup there. So be sure to get involved, support support your favorite head of lettuce, even if it's not mine. So the Catholic League playoffs. I did mention this a little bit earlier. I believe those get underway this week, but I got to be honest with you, I don't really have any idea on the structure of this. I was on the Catholic League website, been around the game for a long time, obviously, but I've never fully understood the Catholic League setup there. So if someone wants to educate me, I'm all ears, happy to listen. I think there's been a couple tiers, maybe like a tier 1 champ and a tier 2 champ where, CC obviously in that top tier, but then like Liggett and Ann Arbor Gabriel Richard and another tier. So I apologize. I probably shouldn't talk about things I'm not completely educated on or don't have enough knowledge of, but it's going on this week. Saw a ton of TBD matchups on the calendar on the hub, but the Catholic League site didn't really have much in terms of structure or brackets or anything like that either. So I know it's a big deal. There's going to be a ton of great matchups, so I at least wanted to acknowledge it. And like I said, if anyone wants to educate me on this, feel free to DM me, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and bring me up to speed on that. Happy to do that. So games of the week. I'll try to run through these as quick as I can here. U of D, Orchard Lake. Tonight, Viking Ice Arena, 5 p.m. That's one of those Catholic League games I was just talking about. I liked Orchard Lake coming into this season. Really liked U of D coming into this season as well. So this is a tough spot for me. Orchard Lake with that big victory over Brighton, I think says a lot. I had high expectations for them coming in, but may even exceed those based on what they've showed they're capable of already. I think this is a great matchup. I've mentioned Will Keane. I'm a believer in him. And how about Brennan Morgan? I mentioned Thaddeus Rainish. Those are the two leading scorers for the Eaglets, 3 goals apiece. November is the month of Morgan there. Brennan Morgan scored 5 of his 9 goals last season during my favorite month of the year. And Rainish, as I mentioned, the freshman, leading the Eaglets there in scoring. Maybe a bit of a recency bias, but I also can't let my blind love for U of D get in the way there either. So I'm going to go with the Eaglets tonight in a really tough game that could really propel Orchard Lake after if you pull off a win there against Brighton and then follow it up with a win over U of D, could really propel them throughout the rest of the season. Next up, I got Bay City Flint Powers, 7 p.m., Bay County Civic Arena. I believe that's tonight as well. I featured both of these teams in the picks already this season, so I won't dive in too much. Initially, I liked Bay City to put a scare into Powers early in the season. I'm going to walk that back a little bit after what I've seen so far through the first couple games of the season. I think the Wolves can play them tough, especially on home ice, but ultimately I think Powers just has too much skill there for Bay City to keep up with. Has like a 5-2 type feel to it. So going with Flint Powers there. Allen Park, Birmingham Let me try that again. Allen Park and Birmingham Unified, 7:30. Frank J. Lotta Civic Arena tonight. Allen Park is undefeated. Birmingham technically is too. They're 1-0. This would be a big win, I think, for BU if they could pull it off. Allen Park is solid in net with Jack Miller. He's played every minute of action for the Jags so far. I think their top lines offset each other in this matchup. Bobby Lees, Alex Horley, and Logan Gent on one side for AP. And then BU's Timo McGrath and Nathaniel Bloom. They could be a nice exchanging of blows there. But ultimately, I got to give the nod to goaltending here. First 1 to 3 goals wins in this, I feel like. And I like Allen Park to do that. Moving into Thursday night, you got Bloomfield Hills taking on Lakes Area, 6 p.m. Detroit Skating Club. Bloomfield Hills in search of its first win, but they've played Lake Orion. They've played M1 United tough in both of those losses. 6 goals from 6 different skaters. I particularly like Nick Elizarov, first-year senior. Got an opportunity to hear from him at OAA Media Day earlier this month. High-end former AAA kid that I think brings a ton to the table. This could be a fun matchup if the top goaltender there, Jacob Van Zweden, is in net for Lakes Area. Great style matchup here of a talented offense on one side and a stout goaltender on the other. Van Zweden is solid in net, like I mentioned. Could steal a couple games for Lake Area down throughout the slate of games this season. But I'm actually going to go with Bloomfield Hills here to get their first win of the season at home, thanks to that pretty dynamic offense they got. 6 goal scorers, 6 goals from 6 different goal scorers. I'm going to ride with the Blackhawks. Friday, Chippewa Valley United takes on Utica Eisenhower, 6 p.m. Suburban Ice Macomb. All I keep hearing is how good the East Side teams are this season, and you got to look out for them. I feel like that's the narrative a lot of years lately, and may not always pan out, but I'm at least intrigued this season. I'm listening. Chip Valley split a pair of games up north last week. Carson Schreiner, Kevin Dolney, my guy, doing a lot of work offensively there. Plus, they're getting healthy. It sounds like they're getting a couple guys back from injuries that kind of carried over from the offseason. Ike let me down last week and let that one loss in the picks snowball into a couple losses last week. I just don't have the confidence in the Eagles right now. So I'm going to go, you guys say fire up Chips? We'll say fire up Chips, 5-1. Grand Rapids Catholic Central, East Grand Rapids. They play at 6:30 at Patterson Ice Arena Friday night as well. Great matchup, great West Side rivalry. These are 2 of the top teams in Grand Rapids. I've been high on both of these teams all fall. I need EGR's goaltending to hold up. I need Joe Green to be great in net. He's been great thus far. 1.25 goals against average. If he can stand strong, if they can get good goaltending out of the back end there, I think the Pioneers have a real good shot in this one. I've raved about EGR's forwards a bunch. Glenn Green is my new guy. Love him. He's fantastic. But not to mention Oliver Owen, James Albers. Those guys actually lead EGR in scoring at the moment, despite all those talented forwards. So maybe a little unexpected, but they've got options up front, basically, is what I'm saying. So ultimately, I'm going to go with EGR to get that 3-2 win on Friday night. I'm going to jump ahead here. Let me see. I'll get into Saturday. I got M1 United versus Novi, 7 p.m., John Lindell Arena. I think these are 2 very evenly matched teams, kind of mid-major type teams that are pretty even. Novi's lost 3 in a row to some very solid teams. They lost 4-2 to Northville in that big rivalry game. I feel like Northville and M1 share a lot of similarities, so this game could follow a similar trajectory that led Novi to actually have a 2-1 lead in that game. So I like Novi's chances in this. M1's top end is pretty high and probably higher than Novi's, but the Wildcats may have a bit more depth. And if they can get a solid performance in net, that can at least slow down the Griffins' offensive attack and guys like Charlie Price and Griffin Prisbillo. It could give the Wildcats a chance. So I'll definitely consider it an upset if it happens. And I'm going to go with the Novi Wildcats there to get back in the win column on the road Saturday night. And this is my last one here. Saved the best for last. Personal favorite. I've dubbed it the War of the Woods. Crosstown rivalry at its finest. Forest Hills Northeastern takes on Forest Hills Central, 8 p.m., Patterson Ice Arena. I will be watching, definitely tuning into this one. The Bird Dogs, the Husky Hawks, they got a couple names there, but I love it. Bird Dogs have won the last 3 meetings in this rivalry, but I think that changes Saturday. Forest Hills Central received a TED Talk over the weekend on what it takes to compete at the highest level in the state. I think they took their licks a little bit at the hands of Hartland and Clarkston. They take what they learned in those games, apply it, and get back in the win column Saturday against a hated rival. Gibson Grendel should be the best player on the ice in that game. I need him to let the game come to him a little bit more. Don't press. Don't force the issue. Your opportunities will come. If you just stick to the script, keep things simple. I thought a lot of the Rangers kind of gripped the stick a little too tight last week when things didn't quite go their way. So if they can weather the storm, kind of battle through adversity. If you get a bad call, if a puck doesn't, battle through that a little bit, stay in the fight, stay in the hunt. I think they can win pretty decisively here, maybe 4 or 5 to 1. So that will wrap up the picks as my little one cries in the background. That's why I was kind of under the gun trying to get this one done. So again, the picks will be posted on the website shortly. You can check those out at pdspicks.com and make your pick along as well. And again, if you've made it this far, come on. You got to subscribe by now. What are you waiting for? Like, subscribe, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, you know the drill. Connect with me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and obviously here on YouTube. Appreciate your support. And until next time, skate hard, have fun. I'll see you at the rink soon.